Hello! This is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you will know that you can type your questions and comments on whatever platform you happen to be watching on. They'll show up here in my chat room and we can talk directly. And I've had an interesting time setting up the broadcast today. We will talk about that in a moment. I did want to say I've been talking about narrowing down some of the Facebook pages that I post on. Not the wider series of platforms, but specific Facebook pages. Some of them have only a few views. And I want to, for a better way to put it, concentrate the audience a little bit more, partly to help people communicate with each other, partly to make it a simpler process, and because I'm hoping also to expand in other ways. And I hope that if you like the broadcast, you will like it on whatever platform that you're watching it on, and also please share it. Let other people see. I have a little list of the pages I'm going to be broadcasting on, and it's going to continue on Divination TV, Corellian Publishing, the Corellian Bulletin Board, Witch School, the official page, my personal page on Facebook, and the Pagan World / Daily Spell page, and I think that's the number of pages that it's going to continue on. So if you're watching on those pages, please continue watching there. If not, watch on any of the ones I've mentioned, or you can watch it on YouTube. It will certainly continue there. And hello to Bimby in the chat room, and hello to Janet in the chat room, and hello to Michael in the chat room. It's good to see all of you. And today is Monday, which means tonight will be my weekly chat room on Patreon. If you're a member of my Patreon, you can attend that. I'm sure that I'll be seeing a number of people this evening. If you like my work and you'd like to support it, you can always join my Patreon. We have the chat room every week. We have a number of other features, which can be a little more occasional. It all kind of depends. One of the things we recently have been bringing my Patreons is Ed the Pagan's class on pagan power, which of course is also available to supporters of Pagan World. And a lot of interesting things do happen on my Patreon. And you can find that at revdonlewis.com. So what happened with the broadcast today? And good morning to Antonio in the chat room. It's good to see you. Well, I guess it's good afternoon now. And Christine, it's good to see you, Christine. And so I come out here, I find my computer has restarted itself during the night because apparently it needed to update with something, which I find kind of annoying because it just updated yesterday. But anyway, um, I got that all worked through, set up the broadcast with the same lighting I use every day, wearing the vivid blue shirt that I've often worn, and find out that my shirt is transparent. Good morning, Amanda, in the chat room. It's good to see you. And it's the shirt that matches this tie, and you can see what the problem was. So I changed the lighting a little bit, but it was still somewhat transparent. So I decided to wear a different shirt, but I don't really understand what the change was. So I'm looking at that and wondering. I do see it's a somewhat overcast day. Maybe that's all it was. I usually have quite a bit of natural light coming directly in on me. But the weird little things about broadcasting you don't stop and think about. Um, I know that with old-fashioned network broadcasting, which of course is prehistory now, there were all kinds of things you had to consider in terms of what colors to wear, um, how makeup was handled. At one time, makeup was necessary for most people in order to make them look natural. And that was certainly true in the black and white era and the Hollywood era. Hello to Janet in the chat room. It's good to see you, Janet. One of the things I've been watching lately are videos on classic era black and white makeup. And one of the things that explained a lot to me, because I've noticed that over the years, their ability to film women's lipstick improved considerably. Because if you look at old films, it photographs black. Um, it always gives a very darkish appearance. It's not always black, but it's very darkish. And then later, it looks far more natural within the context of everything being black and white. It turns out what they did is they stopped using red and started using green because it photographed more realistically. Um, I did not know about that. And that was a very interesting thing to learn. I did know that most of the costumes that you see in older black and white movies often were themselves in shades of black, white, or gray because of the need to control how they were going to film. Are not necessarily what they look like, because in black and white, you have to consider that. So that's interesting. I remember a rumor some years ago, um, which obviously made no sense, but a lot of people believe it. Hello to Mary in the chat room. It's good to see you, Mary. That in the early days of black and white television, stripes could not be photographed. Um, there was a certain level at which that made sense because stripes can be hard to film with older technologies. But the rumor was that Mr. Ed, the horse on the old Mr. Ed show, was actually a zebra, and they had to completely paint the horse in order to film him properly. And this was an amusingly bad rumor. But I remember when that was going around. But it is true that in the black and white era, a lot of things weren't necessarily quite what they looked like. If you actually saw them in person, this was not always true. And it depends on a number of things. And talking about the use of the green lipstick, it also depends on the shade that we're talking about and what they were trying to achieve on the camera. But sometimes when you see someone with in an older black and white film, what appears to be a very natural look, it wasn't necessarily achieved that way. One of the reasons that makeup became so very popular in the 20th century was the film industry, because in the early days, they needed so much light to be able to capture the image that people's features completely tended to blend out. Um, Not always and not everyone, but enough that the vast majority of actors had to wear makeup, and often heavy makeup. And the Cupid's bow mouth that was so very popular in the 1920s was a direct result of this. I think it was Max Factor who invented that look as a way of applying um, lipstick in the form of grease paint uh, to the actresses in a way that did not go all the way to the edges of their mouth, because the hot lights would also make it run. And it became a very fashionable look because everybody loved the cinema. One of the interesting things to look at, but today we're going to talk about the history of board games, and particularly metaphysically speaking. And of course, we're talking about things that were thousands of years ago. So we're talking also about extrapolation and interpretation. But board games have been with us for a very long time. And the earliest board game that is known to have existed is the Egyptian game Senet. And the name Senet means passing, um, or passings. And this is a board game that you can easily find photos of. There are many, many examples of it um, still in existence. But Senet goes back not only to the first dynasty of Egypt, but even to pre-dynastic Egypt, which makes it about 3500 BC, or about 5,500 years ago, which is a long time. And Senet is a fun game to play, although we only have reconstructed rules for it. Because whatever else they did, the Egyptians did not write down the rules. But they depicted it frequently in their tombs, and they often included a game of Senet in their tombs. And that's actually what I wanted to talk about. There were other Egyptian board games. There was one called Mehet, um, which was basically in the form of a snake, um, which also is sometimes found in tombs. It did not have the enduring popularity of Senet. There's still evidence of Senet even during the Roman period. So it continued to be played for a very long time. But in the tombs, you'll often see the deceased person, or sometimes the deceased person and their spouse, playing Senet, but without a visible partner. And, you could say the presence of the Senet board in the tomb is just a grave good. The person enjoyed playing the game during their lifetime. Of course, you're going to want to send it with them into the afterlife. Um, Grave goods aren't always quite that simple, but that's the basic idea. And you can certainly interpret it that way, but why is it painted on the wall? And why is it painted that way? There is a famous portrait of Queen Mutumuya, who was the mother of Amenhotep III, sitting at her Senate board, completely alone in the middle of the game. And my thought on this, and the Egyptians did eventually write at some length about the metaphysical and religious aspects of the game, but that was centuries later. Um, but I think this is very much in the same theme that we sometimes see in more modern productions, um, in movies and the like, where you see the person playing usually chess, either with the gods or with death, as part of the process either of living life or of crossing from this life to the next life. And I think that was largely, in the funereal sense, the meaning of this game, that it represented the passage into the next life. And the idea was that you move forward, um, in the same way that you do in the game, and you eventually get there. And the Egyptians do seem to have had a more, how can I properly put it? A less assured version of reaching the afterlife, although I'm not sure how much that was reality. But when you look at the things that they did, in terms of their writings and so forth, there seems to be a belief on their part that you could not successfully reach that destination. So a board game was a pretty good um, example of it. Now, does it represent the passage to the afterlife or the living of this life? Well, we have no way to know. Like I say, they did write a little bit about it, but that doesn't necessarily speak to what they believed about it hundreds and thousands of years earlier. The Egyptian civilization lasted longer than the period of time that has elapsed since it basically timed out to other civilizations. So what they believed in that pre-dynastic era may be very different from what they were writing about in Hellenistic times. And in fact, in many cases, we know very well that it was. But what they believed about Senate as such is a little harder to say. But Senate and a couple of other board games for more brief periods of time do seem to have had an important funereal role and an important philosophical role in how they were dealing with things. Now, if we look at more recent things, chess and some of its variants and predecessors have also had a similar role in certain theologies. Chess, I believe, originated in India or Persia and worked its way west. and became extremely popular. But before it became popular in places like Scandinavia and the British Isles, it was preceded by variants that were somewhat different, but still the same idea. And in the medieval period in particular, you find some very interesting references to chess. And I have read, I'm not going to call it Reconstructionist theology, but things that were based on Arthurian mythology from a kind of a more or less Reconstructionist point of view that attributed importance to the idea of the chessboard as a metaphysical symbol, and sometimes very prominent. And you do see in the Welsh mythology, in particular, the use of the chessboard as a symbol of fate and the living of this life. And this is an interesting thing because we also again see it in modern things. One of the more interesting movies out there, even after many years, is The Seventh Seal, which involves a chess game between the hero and death. And of course, that game is over life and death. But this has been a pretty prominent symbol. And looking at how the Egyptians used Senate, and they're not the only people who tended to involve this sort of thing in their mythology and theology, I can't help but think it's a very old symbol. Even if they perhaps looked at it a little bit differently than you tend to see it today, they can't have looked at it too differently considering what they actually did say about it and how they depicted it in a funereal setting. So, what do I say about that? Well, I think it's actually kind of a pretty good, um, a pretty good symbol of how we go through life. We make our move, we see what the universe does. We make another move. It is kind of like a game of chess or a game of Senate or whatever else you might choose to liken it to. There are a number of sword and sandal movies from the 1960s that have the gods playing chess over the fate of humankind, and I don't think that that deity exactly works that way. But again, it's not a bad symbol of how we interact with the universe. And sometimes the moves that we make have consequences that we deal with indefinitely. Other times they're easily recoverable. And this is an interesting point of view. I don't usually think in those terms of life as a board game, but I kind of have to agree with it. And hello to Stephen in the chat room. And Stephen says, "Kings and queens, LOL." Yes, um, it is a very interesting way to look at things. I don't really have a lot to say about it. This is pretty much what I've got, but it's interesting to consider the age of this symbolism and the fact that board games are still very popular. And we rarely stop to think of them in these terms, but as pagans, we might want to stop and think a little bit. One of the things that my cousin Crystal wrote about in her book "Living the Wiccan Life," the original version, I think it's in the rewritten version also, was the idea, what death walking it was called, which of course she was quoting other authors who've written about this, but she was recommending it as something to do. Um, Crystal is somewhat older than myself, as you probably know, since I've mentioned her so many times. At this age, I get it a little bit more than I did at the time, but death walking is the idea of preparing for your death in meditation, how you're going to go forward. And this seems to me to be a perfectly reasonable um, meditation for that crossing into the next world, only one of many possibilities, but certainly an interesting one. Um, yeah, I might want to. Well, maybe since I've got still a few minutes, I'll talk a little bit more about that idea of death walking. More commonly, what you do in death walking is first you think about how you represent death in the afterlife. How do you expect to encounter it? I come from a background where the idea is that what you expect is what you're first going to experience. Not necessarily what you'll experience indefinitely, but what you'll first experience. And how long between lives you'll experience that will partly depend on your level of development. But if you're expecting to go um, to an afterworld paradise, if you're expecting to show up in Valhalla um, or in Helheim, both of which were afterworld paradises in Germanic theology, or if you're expecting to show up in the Duat in Egyptian theology, or Tartarus in Greco Roman theology, start from there. And how do you get there? And in meditation, you kind of map out the route that you're going to take. And you work with this. And of course, part of what we do in magic is crossing between the worlds frequently, but we don't always think of it this way. Um, and um, I think that it can be a useful exercise, especially if you're like myself, getting older and have dealt with death a few times, to be prepared for that journey. Um, I really always thought of it as crossing through the light. That's what I do when I cross spirits who are lost. And so for me, that is my death walk. That's how I perceive it. Um, and so, I recommend that as a meditation for you. And Stephen says, when they were alive, I knew Gavin and Yvonne Frost personally and were with them at Brushwood. Um, Practicing magic. That's very interesting. And Christine says, my grandkids love board games. We play chess at the library quite often. That's very good. They love learning the rules and regulations and how to conquer. I believe this comes naturally to humans. Well, yes, I think it does. And I think that chess, in particular, is a game of strategy. And I think it's good for children to learn chess because you really have to think about how you're going to play it. And I think that it's a good tool for learning how to think. One of the things we've talked a lot about developing tools for pagan homeschooling, but the ones that are really needed are on how to think. And we've talked about that here on the program before. Talked about how my mother used games for critical thinking. The one she particularly enjoyed that I remember, and there may have been others that I didn't even realize were going on. Because my mother later said she used every moment as a teaching moment that she possibly could. But I spy, I knew we were playing a game. It was fun. She would pick an item within visual range, and I would have to. Well, we would take turns, but you would have to identify the item through um, basically guessing what it was not. I mean, you could say it is it usually started with is it bigger than a bread box? Something would have very little meaning to modern children. And then you'd go through the different items that could describe it, and it would be either yes or no. And eventually, you would eliminate all the things it could not be, and you would know what the item was. That is a great game, especially in early youth, for critical thinking. Chess is a great game for critical thinking. And Christine says, yes, we spy with our little eyes as well. That's very good. And I want to say hello to I think it says jazz, but I can't quite tell. But hello. Um, it is a very stylized writing. Um, but yeah, there are a lot of things that you can do to stimulate critical thinking, and you can learn critical thinking later in life, but it's a terrible mistake, in my opinion, not to be developing it from the very start. Um, I think that anyone who is working with materials for pagan parenting really must pay attention to things that develop critical thinking. Critical thinking is not widely taught in our society. Part of that is because I think a lot of people don't really want people to be able to think critically. But part of it is because a lot of people don't know how to think critically themselves. I look back at my teachers in my childhood, the vast majority of whom were very good people doing their very best. But looking back at what they did not know and therefore could not teach is kind of breathtaking to me. Now, I will grant you that I have spent my life as an autodidact. I study everything. And so the things that I think of as being ordinary to know really are not necessarily. But some of the things I would have thought they might have known, I remember now they do not seem to have known. Um, but I think that's because things like critical thinking and so forth really just aren't that widespread. Of course, that's part of what makes it special. That's part of what makes it worth having. But every person is better off for being able to think critically. And if you have children, anything you can do to help develop that skill, and that's what it is, it's not a talent, it's a skill. Anything you can do to help them develop that skill is going to be very good. Um, One of the things that I often talk about is the way that we often mistake skills for talents and talents for, quote, gifts. Um, there are certain things that might be described as a gift. If a person has the ability to sing at a certain range, for example, that is a physical factor. That's a gift. If you don't have it, you can't get it. Um, Learning how to sing is not a gift. That's a skill. Um, but you'll have to sing at your natural range. Being able to do artwork is a skill. Being able to do psychic reading or magic are skills. They are not gifts. And that you can have a talent for it, but it's still a skill that you really need to be developing. I was talking with a person the other day who was telling me how she had grown up in a family that was very anti-psychic. She had no training in it. She didn't know how to shut it off. It caused her all kinds of problems. Well, that's because it's a skill. You need to learn these things. And yes, you can come in with a natural aptitude for it. I believe that's because you've practiced it in other lives, but that doesn't mean that you're going to remember all the things you need to know. And that's why it's good, even if you have a certain degree of natural psychic ability, to go ahead and study it and learn how to turn it on when you want it and turn it off when you don't. Learn how to do the proper cleansings, learn how to keep your energy clear, keep your shielding up, etc. Because these are very important things and they don't necessarily come to you naturally. But that's my little soapbox on that. So anyway, I see we've come to the end of our half hour. I hope that you've enjoyed the show. And I will be seeing you tomorrow. Tomorrow, our guest will be Ed the Pagan. We'll be talking about the third and final class in the Pagan Power course. I think it's been a fascinating course. I don't know if you have been watching it, but I certainly think you should. A lot of pagans have very limiting ideas about what that word means. And the first part of the first class was talking about the most basic sense of power at all, the power to breathe. It starts when you're born. And you better keep that power because the power to breathe is what keeps you going. If you've ever had a situation where you can't breathe, you'll know just how true that is. Um, but that is a power. It is the power of your lungs. It is the power of your respiratory system. A lot of people really limit their definition of the word. And Bimby says, "Thank you for the talk." Thank you, Bimby. I'm glad you appreciated it. But with that, I see that it's time for me to go. Let us close with our prayer as we always do. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow. Um, and I think that we will have a good week. Tomorrow, I will be broadcasting to the pages I listed earlier, and I hope you'll join me there. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to continue to be with us and guide us as we go forward and help us to make the right moves in the chess games of life. Help us to have critical thinking in all the things that we do, as well as your help and aid and the help of fate. Help us to make wise decisions. And on those occasions when we don't make wise decisions, which happens to all of us, help us to make wise recoveries. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and thanks. And knowing you're always with us, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. May you be blessed now and always, and I'll see you again tomorrow.